Good morning, everyone. I am very happy and excited to welcome you to the NPTEL online certification course, Tribal Studies in India, Interdisciplinary Perspectives and Approaches. So, the course is offered by myself, Dr. Roorkee. I am an assistant professor of sociology at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, IIT Roorkee. And I am offering this course along with my colleague, Dr. Sarbani Banerjee. She is from the English discipline and both of us are from the same department. So, as you can see, the title of our course is indicative of the fact that the course will focus on the study of tribes, particularly in the context of India. Now, there is also a reason as to why we put that interdisciplinary perspectives and approaches, because both of us hail from different disciplines. My colleague Dr. Sarbani is from English, trained as in English discipline, and I am trained as a sociologist. So, in this course, we will try to understand the concept of tribe, how it has been used over a period of time, and then we will look at the different ways and approaches, both from sociology and anthropology as well as from English, to how different disciplines have approach or the methods and theoretical frameworks that are prevalent to the study of tribal communities in India, and how we can bridge the two. Now, both of us have worked quite extensively on tribes or tribal communities, and we also bring with us our experience in terms of working in different regions. My colleague Dr. Sarbani Banerjee has worked extensively on central India, particularly in the state of Jharkhand, Orissa and West Bengal, and my research has primarily focused on the tribes of Mizoram, Manipur, Tripura in the northeastern part of India. So, we think that our interdisciplinary focus is not only about bringing two disciplines together, but also about bringing the two regions where we are working together. So, in that way, through this course we hope that we will be able to bridge the different kinds of differences, the different kinds of approaches in the study of tribes. So, with this today, I am very happy to again start the course that is Tribal Studies in India. Since this is the first lecture, we will basically look at the concept of tribe. We will try to understand how the concept has been used over a period of time. Now, needless to say, disciplines like anthropology and sociology in particular has significantly contributed to the study of tribes, not only in the context of India, but elsewhere as well. And since the term has a negative connotation, it more or less abandoned in the West, but in the context of India, all of us know that tribe, the category tribe is not only a social identity, but it is also an official identity, in the sense that there are communities who are officially recognized as scheduled tribes under the Constitution of India. So, in that sense the identity has been as a tribe or a tribal or a scheduled tribe has been internalized by communities who are recognized as tribes. Its significance also lies in the fact that there are a lot of communities in India today who are demanding the recognition as a scheduled tribe. So, therefore, it is important to really understand what is the meaning of tribe, who are tribal communities, who are scheduled tribes, and what is the basis of recognizing a community as scheduled tribes in India. So, to begin with a little bit about the etymology of the term tribe. Now, the term tribe came from the Latin word tribus, which means a division of citizenry, administrative divisions and voting units of ancient Rome. Now, in this understanding, it was more of a tributary kind of relationship between a group or a communities in the imperial state, where gifts and tributes were being exchanged. Now, however, the way in which we use the term tribe is very different and very distinct from the way it was used and known in ancient Rome. A significant aspect or a significant landmark was the entry of tribe in the Encyclopedia Britannica of 1911, which first describes the meaning of the word in terms of Roman administration, and it puts I quote from the quote, its ethnological meaning has come to be any aggregate of families or small communities which are grouped together under one chief or leader, observing similar customs and social rules and tracing their descent from one common ancestor. Now, I read this out because this in some sense has drawn significantly from the way in which it was used in the ancient Rome, and the entry of the term tribe in the Encyclopedia Britannica has also significantly popularized the term tribe in our everyday vocabulary. But it was not until the 16th century that the term tribe has gained prominence, and it was this also coincided with the rise of colonial powers or the Euro-American colonial expansion in different parts of the world. Now, the concept tribe began to be used as a category like race, caste, class. So, therefore, it was in a large in a big way that colonial administrators and European settlers who began to use the term tribe to specifically denote primitive and non-state communities who are governed by the principles of kinship. Now, coming in a more specific way to the Indian context, there are definitely some traces in which these communities who are today identified and categorized as tribes are being known. So, pre-colonial depictions of communities now identified as tribes are found in the Sanskritic and Hindu religious texts. They depict tribes as communities living under primitive and barbarous conditions, and tribes at times they were referred to as Daityas, Rakshasas and Nisats in the Hindu religious texts. However, it was not until the establishment of the Asiatic Society of Bengal in 1784 that communities who are recognized as tribes began to be studied in a more systematic manner. Now, when one talks about the study of tribes in India, one cannot ignore the contribution of the colonial state. Now, for example, there are scholars like Nicholas Dirks who have termed the colonial state, that is the British in India, as an ethnographic state. All of us know that in a big way I mean the role of colonialism or the colonial state in terms of contributing to the emergence of disciplines such as anthropology. Now, in India as well, it was primarily the colonial agents whether they are the missionaries, whether they are the administrators or whether they are the travelers, who were one of the first one to have really written about tribes. Now, even today to study any tribal communities, whether we like it or not, whether we agree to what has been written about them by the Britishers, we have to go back to these colonial monographs. Now, some of the prominent works includes Dalton's Descriptive Ethnology of Bengal, Risley's Tribes and Castes of Bengal, Russell and Hira Lal's Tribe and Castes of the Central Provinces of India, and Thurston Castes and Tribes of Southern India. Now, during the same period, the emerging discipline of anthropology was deeply influenced by the idea of historical progress and social evolution, which in other words was the dominance of evolutionary idea. Every society passed through these distinct stages in history from when transitioning from a traditional to a modern society. Now, anthropological discourse relegated tribes to the lowest stage in human evolution, in a sense that tribes are not only primitive, but they are also backward. And unlike modern society, tribes are largely non-modern, and ethnographic work by the colonial writers significantly contribute towards this, in a sense that they begin to identify tribal communities as those who are non-literate, those who are non-industrial, and communities who are predominantly agrarian and predominantly rural. All these characteristics define or shape the understanding or the notion about tribes in India. So, broadly, like I said the colonial monographs continue to be very instrumental or very pivotal in terms of understanding the tribal communities in India. And needless to say all of us knows that many of the tribal communities in India largely are oral society, in a sense that most of them do not have a system of writing. So in that sense, the colonial monographs, are also important in the sense that, they were the first one to actually put down, about the histories, the cultures, the myths, the belief systems, the traditions, the custom of tribal communities. Now, so broadly, we can, categorize, two broad perspectives, when it comes to ethnographic writing about tribes in India. One is known as, one is the understanding of tribe as a particular type of society based on kinship ties, and second is tribe as a stage of evolution. Now, in the case of, tribe as a particular type of society, it more or less view tribe as a social group with a definite area, dialect, cultural homogeneity and unifying social organization. Now, apart from this, there are some, significant, or there are some characteristics, that were being observed, such as, relative egalitarianism within the group, the absence of complex political structures, strong and functional kinship bonds, cooperation, territorial integrity, cultural and linguistic distinctiveness, and lower levels of technology. Now, some of the traits, of what, colonial ethnographers or colonial writers, found about Indian society was also significantly, shaped by the way in which they understand the larger Indian society. For example, we know that, in India, many of the communities, are predominantly, belonging to the Hindus, Muslims, so on and so forth, and many communities, have, this system of caste, which is, more or less a very, hierarchical, way of organizing, socially, culturally and economically. Now, in the context of tribes, many tribal communities do not have these systems of caste or caste system. Now, therefore, these observations that, tribes are more or less more egalitarian, is something which is very, very prominent. Likewise, the absence of complex political structures, in the sense that, many tribal communities, are more or less, considered to be, small in terms of their population. They occupy relatively, small geographical area, in a sense that, there is some kind of geographical compactness, and the absence of political structure also in terms of, that they have, their own independent system of governance, such as, chieftainship, so on and so forth. So, these are some of, the distinct characteristics in which tribal societies, were being characterized. Now, the other part, which is tribe as a stage of evolution, it sees, tribal communities as primitive societies, in the sense that, they are lacking all the traits that characterize modern society or modern communities, particularly the Western, society. Like I said, tribal communities, they lack, non-literate, they are uncivilized, uncultured, they are non-industrial, they are predominantly agrarian, and they are significantly or predominantly rural. So, basically tribal communities are understood in terms of what they do not have and the kind of things, that they lack. In that sense, they are still, living in a very, very primitive stage of life. Now, however, this is not to say that, these two views, are, clashing, one another. So, there are some, complementary between the two views, in a sense that, the tribal communities are seen as having primitive social organization, implying that they are at the lower stage in the evolutionary social hierarchy in terms of their socio-cultural characteristics, economy and political structures, often being described as simple as well as insulated from changes in the larger regional polity. Now, when, I just wanted to take some time explaining this evolutionary social hierarchy. Now, if some of you may have, studied anthropology and sociology, and all of us know that, every sociologist, whether it is the key sociological thinkers like Karl Marx, Max Weber, Emile Durkheim, they have devoted, almost, their entire life trying to understand, how human society changes over a period of time and what are the factors contributing to the changes. But all of them, despite the fact that, they have all, different concepts and different ways of looking at the changes happening in society, they all in a sense subscribe to this evolutionary thinking, in a sense that they all believe that, society will transition from one stage to the other stage, like from traditional to modern society. So, in that sense, the evolutionary social hierarchy in the context of tribes means that, tribes are at the lowest rung of, these stages of human evolution. So, another important thing is that we always see, or we always imagine tribes as, static and unchanging communities, primarily because tribal communities are viewed as communities who lives in, isolation, particularly geographical isolation from communities, in a sense that, they live in the deep interiors of the forest, they live in the deep interiors of the hills, and they are rarely in touch with, the outside world. So, in the context of India, this understanding is also primarily, important, because it has shaped the way in which we understand tribal communities even till today. So, in India today, we have, more than 750 communities who are recognized as scheduled tribes, and I will come about these, facts in the later part of my slides. So, however, it is also important to know that the groups identified as scheduled tribes, have never associated, or have never identified themselves as tribe as such, in a sense that the general category or the term tribe was absent in the vocabulary of the people who are identified as scheduled tribes. Now, for instance, there is no vernacular reference for the term in the language and dialect of several tribes in the northeastern part of India. Now, the northeastern part of India, is specifically important because in terms of, the absolute numbers, the tribal population in the northeast, may not be very large, when we look at the national level, but then if you look at the regional level, you will see that, northeast India is quite unique in a sense that most of the states in the northeast, are predominantly inhabited by tribal communities, and it is tribal communities who are the dominant communities in terms of their population in states such as Meghalaya, Mizoram, Nagaland, Arunachal Pradesh, and even in states like Assam, Manipur and Tripura, they also have, a significant tribal population. So, which is, something that is quite distinct when one looks at, the demography of tribal population in mainland India. Now, so despite that, in northeast India, there is no real, no communities in northeast India who are recognized as scheduled tribes, have, this term tribe, in their own or vernacular language. Now, again, it was the colonial administrators who began to introduce and popularize the term tribe to classify diverse groups of people. A significant point that I think one has to remember is, the diverse groups of people. Now, let me come back, to the tribes in northeast India. If you look at, states like Nagaland, there are, somewhere around 16 tribes, 16 Naga tribes within Nagaland. Now, if you look at Manipur, there are more than 30 communities who are recognized as tribes. If you look at Assam also, there are significantly maybe, around 10 to maybe more than that communities who are recognized as scheduled tribes. Likewise, in Arunachal Pradesh, in Tripura, in Meghalaya as well. Now, if you look at all these communities who are recognized as scheduled tribes, you will see that, beyond being recognized as a scheduled tribe, there is nothing really which is very, similar about these communities, in a sense that, all these communities, where they are big or small communities in terms of their population, they more or less have their own distinct culture, their own distinct language, distinct customs, distinct traditions, different types of economic practices. Now, therefore, it becomes very convenient, for the colonial state or for the Britishers to classify this very heterogeneous population, into one category known as tribe. So, like I said, today communities who are identified as tribes, they varies in terms of their physical traits, their language, their demographic size, ecology and regions inhabited. Now, in terms of demographic size, for example, there are tribal communities who may be less than 1,000 in terms of their numbers. Now, there may be tribal communities like the Gonds, in Madhya Pradesh and elsewhere, whose numbers can go up to more than 10 lakhs. Now, there are tribal communities again in the northeast, maybe the Mizo community, whose number can be around, 8 to 9 lakhs. But at the same time, if you look at some of the tribal communities in states such as Manipur, you will see that many of them number between, 10,000 to 20,000. So, there is a lot of, significant variations in terms of their demographic size as well. Now, in terms of the languages also, most of the tribal communities, have their own distinct languages, not only at the community level, but at the village level also. You will see that, there are certain distinct languages which are being spoken in one village or two villages or three villages, right. So, there is no end to diversity when we talk about tribes. So, tribes are also classified based on different stages of social formation, acculturation and development. This is something that I have spoken about in my previous slides as well. So, I am not going to repeat it here. So, what is important to understand is this point that the communities who are recognized as tribes, they are mostly identified of what they are not. One, they did not practice Vedic Hinduism, they were not Muslims, they were not integrated to modern economy and civilization. So, basically tribes are identified in terms of what they lack from the larger cultural groups or the so called mainstream society. Now, today the use of the term tribe is something which is very popular now, but then over a period of time the term tribe has been used, defined in different ways, and even as it is an official category of identification today, it was only with the colonial census that the term tribe was officially used to denote or specify certain groups and communities. Now, in the 1901 census, communities who are practicing Hinduism were viewed as castes, whereas tribes were groups or communities who are known to practice animism. So, basically one part of the story is that tribes are communities who are outside of the larger Hinduism or the larger caste society. So, basically they are non-caste society. On the other hand, they are communities who are predominantly practicing what today we call animism. But I think it is still important to understand that the practice of animism is also quite different and distinct across regions and communities. So, animism in a way also is a very convenient category that was introduced by the British to club together communities and people or groups who have a different set of beliefs, customs and traditions. So, the first criteria was more or less, we can say it, the use of religion to identify communities, say Hinduism, Muslim, Islam or Christian or in the context of tribes communities who practice animism. So, religious belief in a sense was the first criteria that was used to designate communities as tribes. Second, in 1921, new idea was used, a new idea, a new reference point. That reference point was geography in terms of communities who lives in the hills and the forests. Now, this idea of tribes says predominantly inhabiting forests, inhabiting the hills continue to be very strong, and it was an idea that was introduced in the year 1921. Now, in the 1931 census, the communities who are primarily identified as primitive or backward are the one who are being categorized as tribal or scheduled tribes in the colonial census. Now, this understanding of primitive and backward continue to be one of the most important yardstick when it comes to categorizing and identifying a community as a tribe. Now, so in some sense the idea of tribe or our notion of tribe is shaped by a sense that tribes are communities who are predominantly backward, predominantly primitive, predominantly people who have rejected or who are still not influenced by any form of modernity or modernization. Now, in 1941, the idea of tribal origin began to be used as the criteria of identification. So, like I said, these classifications were done to simplify and categorize diversity for administrative and classificatory purposes. Now, all of us know that even in today in India we continue to use census. Now, in census there are different there are different parameters in which a communities or a family or a groups or a region or a state are being clubbed together. Now, in that sense the category tribe was used to simplify this vast heterogeneous people inhabiting this vast geography, and clubbing them together under one category becomes very convenient for the colonial state, because in many ways they also realize and know that these communities are distinct, but within the communities tribes themselves there is a lot of distinctiveness, a lot of diversities. So, the first and foremost thing about the category tribe one has to understand is that it is a very useful way to simplify these very heterogeneous communities into one single category. So, however, over a period of time these tribes continues to be the category tribe begin to be significantly incorporated into the everyday colonial language, particularly in the legal domain. So, separate legislations and policies for the colonial subjects and the tribals were created. Now, in the case of the tribes, Scheduled Districts Act of 1874 and Government of India Act of 1935. Now, this Scheduled District Act of 1874 and the Government of India Act of 1935, which categorize regions as excluded and partially excluded areas, it continues to occupy a very important place when it comes to the understanding of tribes, primarily because it designates certain areas as being inhabited by tribes. Now, in contemporary India, we have two important schedules. One is the 5th schedule and the other is the 6th schedules. Now, the 5th schedule is primarily for the mainland India, tribal communities living in mainland India, particularly in central India. The 6th schedule is primarily for the tribal communities living in northeast India. Now, this history goes back to the Government of India Act of 1935, which designates regions as excluded and partially excluded areas. So, what does this do? What is the implication of this? Now, this created a binary of state and non-state, caste and tribal, hierarchy and egalitarianism, civilized and uncivilized, Hinduism and animism. Now, an important aspect of this schedule is that it resulted into what today we commonly refer to as indirect rule in many of the tribal areas, in a sense that no legislations will be directly applicable to areas which are designated as a scheduled area by the law. Now, even under the Constitution of India today, areas which are governed under 6th schedule in particular have a lot of provisions in terms of protecting the culture and political interests of the tribal communities. Now, the outcome of this was that a broad generalization of the term tribe, which included a diverse population. Now, coming to the post-independent period, tribes are defined mainly in terms of administrative classification that divided the population into tribal and non-tribal. The Constitution of India has enumerated several communities in the list of scheduled tribes. Now, it is article number 366 section 25 which define scheduled tribe, which goes as tribes or tribal communities or parts of group within such tribes or tribal communities as are deemed under article 342 to be scheduled tribes for the purpose of this constitution. Now, it is only the president which can give assent to whether a community should be recognized as scheduled tribes or not. Now, if you look at the numbers today, there are 705 tribal communities. There are 705 communities who are recognized as scheduled tribes. But if you look back at history, if you look back at the last 75 years of India's independence, you will see that the number of communities which are recognized as tribes have grown significantly. For instance, it was 212 in 1951 to 427 in 1961 and 432 in 1971. And today the number has gone up to 705, and tomorrow who knows, the number may go even beyond 800. Now, what this means is that over a period of time there are more and more communities who are being identified and categorized as scheduled tribes. So, as per the 2011 census, tribal communities constitute about 8.6% of the total population of India, which is approximately 10.4 crore people. Now, 8.6% of the total population of India is not a large number when we look at the total population of India. But then you will see that the tribal communities in India are quite spread out across north, south, east and west. We have a significant tribal population as well as in states like Kerala. We have a significant tribal population in Maharashtra, in Gujarat, in Rajasthan, in Himachal Pradesh, in Uttarakhand as well. And we also have, like I said, a significant number of tribal population not only in northeast India, but then tribal communities are the dominant communities in terms of their population. In Mizoram, the entire population of tribal communities is almost like maybe 90 to 95%. In Nagaland also more or less at the same range. In Manipur, it is close to around 40 maybe percent of the total population in the state. So, however, like I said, in terms of their demography, in terms of their numbers, there is significant variation, because some tribes can number only in terms of thousands, some tribes can number in terms of lakhs and lakhs. Now, the Bhil communities, they are the largest tribal group with approximately 38% of the total ST population, while the state of Madhya Pradesh has the highest tribal population in the country. Now, what is the criteria that is being used to identify a community as a tribe in India today? There are 5 criteria which are being used. One is the indication of a primitive traits, second is distinctive culture, third is geographical isolation, fourth is signness of contact with community at large, and the fifth is backwardness. I will come to that criteria and explain a little bit about them. Now, if you look at this map, then you will see that the geographical spread out of tribal communities. Now, like I said, in the northeast, states such as Mizoram, Nagaland, Meghalaya, Arunachal Pradesh, have significant tribal population. Now, again, if you look at the eastern part of India, like Odisha, if you look at the western part of India like Gujarat, if you look at the southern states such as Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and if you look at the up north as well like Himachal, Jammu and Kashmir, tribal communities in India are quite spread out. So, this one is that yes, geographically tribal communities are quite spread out all over the states, and there are also a significant population of tribal communities even in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. But like I said, in terms of their numbers, in terms of their population, in terms of the levels of development, you will see that most tribal communities in the northeast are quite developed, are quite advanced in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of life expectancy. But then if you look at the levels of development of tribal communities such as in the state of in the state of Odisha or in the state of Madhya Pradesh, you will see that they continue to lag behind when it comes to basic human development such as education, healthcare, life expectancy, so on and so forth. Now, coming back to the criteria for defining a community as a tribe. Now, if you look at it, you will see that there is a lot of influence of anthropology in identifying or in the criteria that we are still using today. Now, some of the criteria may be quite relevant for some communities, some of the criteria may no longer be relevant for many communities who are recognized as tribes. Now, if you look at say geographical isolation, to speak of any communities who are being untouched by any other culture, who have no relationship with any other culture, who are not impacted by the forces of globalization, I think in today's world that is something which is impossible, particularly in a country like India. But then we still have criteria like geographical isolation to categorize or to identify a community as a tribe. Shyness of contact with community at large. This idea of shyness of contact also comes from the notion that tribal communities given that they are geographically isolated, given that they have rarely interacted with the outside world, there is some kind of reluctance on their part to have close cultural relations with communities outside of their own. So, another criteria is backwardness, in a sense that they are still very rural, they are still very agrarian, they continue to practice zoom cultivation or shifting cultivations, which is also considered to be one of the most primitive methods of cultivation. So, therefore, all these criteria continue to influence and shape the notion of our understanding of the tribe, but then on the contrary, it is also important to understand that many of these criteria may no longer be applicable to many of the tribal communities who are being identified and categorized as scheduled tribes under the Constitution of India. Now, in the tribal dominant regions that I have shown in this map, particularly in the central India and northeast India, there are two distinct administrative arrangements in the form of the 5th and the 6th schedules under Article 244 section 1 and 244 section 2, which guaranteed autonomy to the country's tribal population who live in regions declared as such. Now, these scheduled areas has been defined in the Indian Constitution in para 6 of the 5th schedule of the Constitution, which lay out the criteria for scheduling, rescheduling and alteration of scheduled areas as such areas as the President may order declared to be scheduled area. Now, today this scheduled area cover 11.3% of the total geographical areas of the country and is located in the state of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Odisha, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra and Himachal Pradesh. Now, what is so important about this scheduled area? What is so significant about this scheduled area, the 5th and the 6th schedule? Now, the 5th and the 6th schedule are relatively different. Now, let me talk about the 6th schedule for instance. The 6th schedule was drafted along with the drafting of the Indian Constitution, where the Constitutionary Advisory Council met different tribal leaders in Northeast India, asking them what kind of political arrangement that they wanted. So, every tribal communities, most of them have demanded that they be given certain form of autonomy that will allow them, at the same time that will give them some kind of safeguard and protection to continue to practice their customs and traditions. Now, many of tribal communities even till today continue to follow traditional customary rules when it comes to governance as well. So, in that sense, as the 6th schedule in the Constitution of India essentially recognize that tribes have a distinct political systems, and therefore, it needs to be legally recognized. So, in states now 6th schedule is enforced in states of part of Mizoram, parts of Tripura and in Meghalaya. In these states, there is something known as the autonomous district council, and this autonomous district council have representatives who are being democratically elected. Now, these autonomous district councils, their role and function is to essentially protect and safeguard the interests of the tribal communities. Now, therefore, the 6th schedule is very, very powerful in a sense that the land rights of the communities, the customs and traditions, the belief systems of the communities are being protected and safeguarded. However, despite this, you see that over a period of time, the way in which we define tribes, the way in which scheduled tribes are being recognized has changed, and it has passed through different stages. There was no single definition of who is a tribe. Even till today, it is still very, very difficult to define who is a tribe, right. In that sense, there is still a lack of consensus on the coherent and well defined criteria to define tribes. Broadly, the criteria that we adopted till today and which we rely on till today are the 5 criteria that I just read out. That is the primitive traits, distinctive culture, geographical isolation, shyness of contact with the community at large, and general backwardness. However, classification of communities as a scheduled tribe is not uniform throughout the country. What this means is that many communities, some community may be a scheduled tribe in Tamil Nadu, the same community may not be a scheduled tribe in Karnataka. Some community may be recognized as a scheduled tribe in Mizoram, whereas they may not be recognized as a scheduled tribe in Meghalaya. Now, let say for instance, let us take the example of some tribal communities in Assam. Now, during the British period, several tribal communities from Jharkhand, particularly the Chotanagpur region, were being transported forcefully to work in the tea plantations of Assam, and today they are popularly known as tea tribes, primarily because they are working in tea plantations. Now, back in Jharkhand or back in Chhattisgarh, all of these communities, where they are the Santals, where they are Orauns, they are identified as scheduled tribes, but in Assam they are not granted any status of a scheduled tribe. So, there is no coherence in terms of the identification of a community as a scheduled tribe. Till 1976, area restrictions were used for recognition of scheduled tribes, in a sense that a tribe can be a tribe only if they live under a specific region or area, and this has contributed to the anomalies in terms of identifying tribes in different areas. Now, in 1976, there was a removal of these area restrictions, which presumed that a tribe can be only a tribe if they live in a particular region. However, even till today, we still continue to have difficulty in terms of categorizing, or there still exists a lot of anomalies when it comes to the identification of tribe. Now, so to conclude, I just wanted to briefly summarize what we have learned from these few slides. So, I try to lay out how the concept of tribe has been used over the time, how the meanings of tribe scheduled tribes have changed over a period of time, and the role of colonialism or the colonial state is very, very important, in a sense that it was the colonial state which have actually officialized the category tribe. And in many ways, we continue to follow the criteria, we continue to follow much of the definitions used by the colonial state to identify communities as scheduled tribes in India today. And again, we have close to 705 communities who are recognized as scheduled tribes, who constitute about 8.6% of the country's total population. And while the term scheduled tribes does denote certain kind of easy classifications when it comes to identifying a community, but then it is also important to acknowledge that there is enormous diversity and differences between communities who are identified as tribes, not only in terms of region from northeast India to mainland India, but also within communities who are identified as scheduled tribes in states like Jharkhand, states like Madhya Pradesh, Gujarat, or even in states like Mizoram, Nagaland, Manipur, Tripura. there is a lot of differences, there is a lot of diversities in terms of language, belief systems, development, culture, traditions, varies from region to region, from tribe to tribe. So, while scheduled tribe or tribe is very very convenient for us to talk about the communities who are identified as such, but I think it is important to acknowledge and realize the fact that we are talking about a group which are quite diverse and distinct in their own ways. Thank you so much.